In my many years of covering anime and really consuming so many stories along the years, one thing kind of creeps up here and there, and that's the idea of what is the writer's intent? What is the writer or author or artist's intent in when they do something? Now, granted, this is nothing new. We can go far back as early as art itself exists, when there's so many things in history where something is created and two different people get a different viewpoint of that particular object. Whether going for suggestive or some people see it artistic, there's always the big question mark of what was the artist's intent in creating something. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we don't really get a clear idea from the artists themselves. They don't come out and say, this is my intention, see it this way. Often cases, it's left to interpretation. But coming back forward in time, back into anime, it becomes an issue as well, because in a lot of cases, there's times where we don't really get a clear perspective from the writer or from the creator exactly what they intended with just maybe a single scene or a show in its whole. Now, granted, there's a lot of stuff that you can obviously get the intent of the writer. If it's an ecchi, if it's a hentai show, it's going to be pretty darn obvious what the writer's going for. They're going for this or they're going for that. Or even when it comes to cases where something about a particular subject, something that's political, there's obviously cases where you'll see, yeah, I think that's what they were going for. But unfortunately, what always kind of bugs me is cases where I see something with actual value, but yet the conversation around it gets flooded by people that see it as something else. And while I see this time and time again, there was a particular boiling point for me, and it was when a series called Erased came out. This is a series that I absolutely loved. The directing in it was phenomenal. The story that it was telling was a huge connection to me. A guy that's essentially trying to stop a travesty from happening, and this involves him going back in time, and a lot of focus particularly on one girl that goes missing. This girl that's abused by her family. And the character's attempt to really pull them out of that danger became a very human story that I really loved. Put aside your thoughts on the ending itself. That key point, the focus on this one girl that needed help, was a story that I was really gravitated to. But again, there's a particular scene in the series where this girl is now at the main character's home. And at some point, the main character's mother decides to take this girl and take a bath with her. And immediately, social media and so many groups started screaming, I can't believe they did this. They're doing this because they want to pervert this scene. This scene is so inappropriate. But it was shocking to me because when I watched it, that wasn't even in my mind. I didn't care where they were at. My thought was immediately to the fact that typically with bath scenes, it's about kind of exposing all, getting very personal with somebody. And that's what I felt in the scene, was this idea that the mother's taking this girl away from the main character, away from this boy, and isolating themselves alone so that the mother can basically have this girl open up to her. What is affecting you? We're here, we're alone. This is a safe area, just the two of us. Let's communicate. And that's what I got from the scene. I didn't get what everybody else was getting. I didn't understand why they would see the writer was intending for that. Because the scene, to me, obviously seemed like it was telling a story. And it's an unfortunate thing whenever something like this happens, whenever a story has these moments where one side will see the negative in it, while the other side sees the story in it. And how the inability for some people to really get past that and not see things as always a negative, but rather what was actually in the scene. And now this isn't a video for me to criticize people that are off-put by certain things. I made this very clear when I did my review of the Eden Deities No Only Peace. At the very beginning of that series, at the very last point of the first episode, there's a scene where essentially a bunch of soldiers force themselves upon a nun. And it's a very whimsical way of portraying it. I was even off-put by it. I was disgusted by it. But what I found as I watched the show was that was the point. Now granted, you could say the writer wanted to do that because they wanted to pervert that scene. But the storytelling aspect that I got from it was their ability to really make you disgusted and realize this isn't a happy place. This is a place full of terror, a place full of horrible things that are happening. And so there's obviously a point to it, story-wise, why they did it. And so when I reviewed it, I said, you're probably going to be off-put by that. And if that makes you not watch it, that's perfectly fine. But the point was, for those that are able to look past it, there was a purpose to it. And there's more story there that I thought was really good, really creative. And the writer had zero filters, really holding themselves back from telling a very compelling story in a world that, yes, is not pleasant. I had the same thoughts when I started talking about Inside Mari. This is a series that the writer obviously knows how to get dirty about things. And the story itself is very dirty. And I noticed that with every single piece of work from this particular mangaka, I realized a trend. that this writer knows how to kind of get into dirty subjects that make you feel when you're reading it that this is filthy. And there's a purpose to it in every single sense. Every time that I, again, get into his work, I'm always disgusted by what they're really getting into. But there's always a punchline that it gets to, a reason for why it's going down that trek. And I always love that payoff from the author and their ability to really show you something you're going to be unsettled by. This was something present in Flowers of Evil, and it was equally present in Inside Mari. And because I can see the writer has a habit of really sticking to their guns and really getting into these subjects, I realize that there's a reason for what they do. It isn't simply just to do something that is perverted, but to really realize that there's a story to be told within that perversion. But again, the subject always comes up is the unfortunate aspect that people are not able to overlook that and see the value in something, but rather discard it and say they can't recommend it because of that. And I don't blame people. This is something that I've dealt with anime for so many years. There's so many shows that I watch and I go, this was fantastic. And then when I go to suggest it to somebody that's not typically an anime, what's always the hang up? Oh, there was that one scene. Are they going to see it for the story that it was telling? Or are they going to see it for the perversion? There's also the case where there's a lot of stories that I really love, but you obviously see the writer is doing something inappropriate. I had that whole thought process with Angel 3P. That was a series that I seen that there was a really cute story in there, but I can't suggest it because it has these little kind of scenes in it that are obviously going for something perverted. But does it always have to prevent somebody from enjoying something? Here recently with Akebi's Sailor Uniform, I kind of hesitated when I talked about that show. It was a show that is a pure slice of life talking about this girl going to this other school. And she's a country bumpkin. And she's got a very immature mindset. So she doesn't see social boundaries and she sees things often from a childish viewpoint, clamoring to get some girl to show her legs, not realizing, hey, you're a teenager, you need to stop doing that. That's what kids would do. But yet still kind of showing these moments, showing these very sensual and almost very personal moments of characters in almost a close-up view, almost sensualizing it to a point where you wonder, is this probably male writer doing this for a sake of sexualizing the characters, or is there a purpose behind how close up and how very detailed he gets with showing the character put on their uniform, which is obviously a big deal to the main character. And what's odd is that after all these shows, with all these shows that I've mentioned before, getting into things like Erased and getting into things like Akebi's Sailor Uniform, the Eden Deities No Only Peace, Inside Mari, and the mangaka behind Flowers of Evil. In all those cases, when I have this struggle, I'm able to kind of shrug it off because they're not stories that I feel like it's going to impact me if people don't watch it. Okay, so you gave up on it because of this. I'm hurt because I think there's something significant in here, but it's not as if I really lose sleep over it. The confusion around the writer's intent has never been so much a thing that I've been bothered by people finding and criticizing until a particular show called Mushoku Tensei, which, let's be honest, is essentially the trigger for this video. With so much talk going on right now about what's in your top 10 list of 2021, what's in the anime awards for the best of the year, the one big question mark is coming up all over the place is, where is Mushoku Tensei? And as I scour around, I look at a lot of these lists and I look at the writers themselves and what they're saying about Mushoku Tensei specifically, the thing that keeps propping up is obviously, I can't suggest this. I want to suggest this because it does this, but I can't suggest it. And why is that? Because the main character is an irredeemable, pervy man-child, and people struggle with telling people to go watch it because of that. And again, I don't criticize people for being unsettled by him as a main character. I don't get upset because people are upset by how terrible he is. And it's really a lot of things that he gets into as a main character that you can't really defend. But again, what is the writer's intent? Is the writer's intent for you to see this guy perving out over stuff? That's the question mark. And thankfully, we actually have a response from this particular author. The struggle that I have with all these shows and really giving people a perspective of, if it's intended or not. The thing that I can only really rely on because there's not really many interviews about these particular scenes is if it's a female writer, sometimes people will shut up about it, We've seen that with things like Ao-chan Can't Study. People were ranting and raving, oh my gosh, this is a perverted show. I can't believe this. Why is the writer doing this? And then what do you find out? The writer's a female, and they're writing about a girl having pervy thoughts. And then suddenly everybody shuts up. Noragami has ecchi in it, and people talked about, oh my gosh, panty shots and all this kind of stuff. Must be a pervy male writer. No, it's two sisters. Obviously, when it's a male writer, it suddenly becomes a lot more difficult to defend. But thankfully, I really do like when we finally get those insights, get those interviews where the writer really kind of reveals all. And we did, thankfully, get that. For those unfamiliar with Mushoku Tensei, it essentially follows a guy who is a shut-in. He was bullied, and he went through so much crap, and he decided to huddle himself up in his room and live pretty much his entire adult life locked up in his room and watching a lot of anime and porn and all that kind of stuff. And he eventually dies and is reincarnated into another world where he gets another shot. And in this other fantasy world, he lives a new life. But unfortunately, a lot of the trappings of his previous life stick with him. He obviously has a very pervy mind. He looks at a lot of things lustily. And in the interview with the writer themselves, they questioned, do you think you went a little too far with this character? His mindset is just very inappropriate. Do you think you went a little bit over the top? And his response was this: I think the balance was just right. Because he's a controversial character, his mountain of regrets make the act of redoing life more meaningful. And what I think he's talking about here is putting a character at so far a low point in his life that it makes that correction so much more impactful. And that's exactly what I got from watching it. Additionally, he says, of course, I have no issues with criticizing Rudius, the main character, at the beginning stage. And it's up to you to decide whether you don't want to see the story because of that. And I like this statement because it's really kind of, again, pointing out this idea that if you find it offensive, the writer themselves is perfectly fine with you walking away. And again, that echoes from myself. It's just that aspect of really realizing that it's not because of negative reasons, that there's a purpose behind something. Additionally, he says, with that said, if there's someone like Rudius close to you, and that person were to have even a slight change of heart and try to start over, I sincerely hope that you won't abandon them on the spot. And that statement hit me. I know this is a little bit of a side tangent from the content of this video, but that's really the point of Mushoku Tensei. That in watching the show, I even personally am a little bit bothered by him. But I think the mentality that there's a chance this guy will correct his path is why I keep watching it. It's almost as if I'm supporting his journey. I want to see him succeed. From the very moment that he states in the early episodes, this is my chance at a next life. This is my chance at a new life. I began rooting for him. I wanted him to achieve that. And it's seeing his growth as a person, because as I mentioned with my review of the show, he's a man-child. He's never matured. He's never grown up. He never lived an adult life, technically. This was his point in doing that. And like I said before, I think getting this perspective, this one answer from this author, really did solidify to me my mentality when I was watching the show, because there was an uncertainty there. I will admit, there was an uncertainty for me as I watched the show. Will he always be like this? And then thus, I can't defend it. It's easier to defend it when I know that the writer's whole purpose was to have a disgusting person mature and grow up. But it's more difficult to defend it when you never know if the author themselves will just continue to use this as a tool to just basically, again, perv out and have people laugh over it. The writer's intent. And I think that answers the writer's intent. The writer intended for the character to be unsettling. The writer intended for you to realize that some people are like this, but that it's also the writer's intent to hope that people change. So will we always get that answer? Will we always have that interview that tells us, oh yeah, by the way, it's this way for a reason. It's not just to be an ecchi show. But if the writer wants to tell a story and discard it because you personally don't want to wait for that, yes, it's sad to me. But at the same time, I don't expect everybody to give patience to something. But it is more frustrating when you see people that won't let it go. That when something is, in your viewpoint, intended to be wrong, but yet it's actually right, that you can't let it go. So as I see all these videos saying, I can't recommend this show because it's terrible and the main character's terrible, a lot of my mindset is for them to just move on, because they obviously missed the intent of the writer. And to project your own intention onto the writer I think is the wrong thing to do. I had that feeling especially with Erased. Why is everybody saying the intent of the writer is to be inappropriate here, when the intent was obviously to tell a story? Why is everybody projecting that the Mushoku Tensei author is doing this because he wants to just get pervy, when in actuality the author wants to show change? Why again is everybody saying that Ao-chan can't study, the author is just all about perving out the mind of a girl, when in fact the writer is a girl? We won't always know the answers to what the writer's intent with things are, but I think there's a thing to be said about giving the benefit of the doubt for the sake of storytelling. And while again, I'm not saying stick with things even if it bothers you, but at least acknowledge when there might be a reason for it. I thank you guys for checking out this video. I hope that you all enjoyed it. As always, if you did, hit that like button down below, comment, let me know what you thought about this topic. What do you think about the idea of really kind of acknowledging the writer's intent rather than implant your own intentions into it? As always, if you're new to this channel, I would welcome you to subscribe so you get my future videos. As always, if you want to support this channel, down in the description below, there's a Patreon and a tips link. I definitely appreciate everybody that does, and y'all take care.